and you walk through them, what does music mean to you? So where do you get the signposts to determine what to look at in musical history? If you look at the history books, you're going to consistently look at the works of the same composers. There is a Berlioz Club, a Wagner Club, a Meyerbeer Club, but there is no Schoenke Club, Czerny Club, Onslow Club. We don't even know who these people are. So what, can you see this? Yeah. So what are the problems that we confronted? First, we had to gather the journals together. And if I lose my place here, I can't see how to get it. Yeah, okay. Journals are often incomplete. There's an overwhelming number of them, and we don't know which to look at. And thirdly, there are no indexes to this, very little. There was almost no indexing in this period. So when you go into a library, you'll likely not find a periodical. If you do, you'll find part of it, and if you do only find part of it, you won't find an index. So this has been the scenario for research in pre-Rippon period. I want to work on Meyerbeer. You go into the library and you look at all of the volumes that you have to look through yourself, and then you go home and you work on a Mexican composer for which you have all of the music. But we're not seeing the context in which all of the history around that composition was created. Now, Rippon has 3 publications. One is an index, one is an index plus the full text, and then we have another new publication, which is searchable full text, and our newest initiative that we're working on creating right now is Rippon Jazz periodicals, because jazz has a place in the scholarly community that has been neglected. Now, if you put together all of our 3 projects, we have 335 journals that you can search, and we have 200 full-text journals from cover to cover. Now, I could tell you that that is a very weighty amount of information, but let me just show you the titles. We've also published over 300 volumes, and we have about the same number of annotated records as Rilla, in the 800,000. We work with 21 countries and deal with the literature in 31. We began in 1980. We are 35 years old. My beard was not gray when we began. Now, this gives you a representative idea of how many titles in each language or geographical area by percentage. But this is only to give you a big picture, because it's not at all accurate. What you really need to know is how many citations do we have for each language and each country. But I figured that out so many times I'm tired of doing it. But let me show you just the titles that we have. Each one of these is a title. It could be 6 months to 90 years of publication. Finally, we come to Latin America. We're regretfully not as rich in Latin America, although we recently published an index to the Bulletin Latinoamericano de Música, which is one of the most important Latin American journals. With respect to Mexican journals, the largest part of our contribution comes from the Synodine, and Mr. Gonzalez, who worked closely with us for a number of years, and the majority of the titles beneath Mexico are there because the Synodine graciously worked with us to do it. Now, I could tell you that Ripum is important, and I'm going to lack a great deal of modesty now. I'm going to show you and ask you simply to read. You don't need me to read for you. What do the funding agencies say about Ripum? What does the international press say about Ripum? And what do authors in their publications say about Ripum? This is what funding agencies have to say.
It's hard to see. Can you please read it out loud?
Oh boy, sure. That's embarrassing.
No, it's okay.
All right, thank you. It's impossible. Okay, hold on.
Do you want me to help?
That's okay.
Should we turn the light on?
No, because no, you won't see anything. I have to turn this on so I can do this. Okay, just keep my finger here. It's impossible to overstate the significance of this project. This is one of the major bibliographical projects in musicology of our time. Because of Ripum, students are being better educated and trained. Librarians and archivists serve their collections and readers much more efficiently. The influence of Ripum will be enormous in the coming decades. I'll just read parts now. Ripum has dramatically enhanced musical scholarship. Ripum is reshaping our views of music itself. Ripum is universally recognized as one of the primary tools in research. I think you get the picture. So it's one of the most ambitious projects in musicology. It is indispensable. It's a fundamental tool. It's used across the globe every day. And now we're looking at the press. What have journals in reviews of Ripum had to say? Should be on the reference shelf of every library. Extraordinary coordination on both sides of the Atlantic. Ripum is indispensable. This comes from the Times Literary Supplement of London. The excellence of this worthwhile project is beyond doubt. An editorial initiative of huge mass which we will read and reread. Now, I don't want to continue. It becomes a little bit of an advertisement. But I do want you to understand how it's viewed. Otherwise, there's very little reason for me to stand here and tell you and expect that you would listen to me. So we are very concerned that given the view of Ripum internationally, that it's not available in your country, and we don't have a great deal of information about Latin America, which we hope very much to change. Now these comments, which I won't really read to you, come from books. And they explain the extent to which these authors depended upon Ripum to actually do the research for their volumes. Now you would expect to find Chopin, Gounod, Verdi, Puccini. Wrong button, sorry. But you would not expect to find perhaps Bach studies, C.P.E. Bach, Handel research, German music of the 18th century, the Guitar Foundation. So our period is very close to the earlier period, and the more we expand, the more important this becomes for Handel research, for Bach research. Let me give you just one example from this. Someone wanted to study the reception of Handel's Messiah. Am I speaking slowly enough?
Yes.
Thank you, good. And if you look at the section that says Handel research, he went to the Ripum database and found references to 1,204 published reports of performances of Handel's Messiah. He then went to the e-library, and I will explain the difference in a moment, and found an additional 1,536 reviews of performances of Handel's Messiah. Now, the importance of Willem and Ripum have long been recognized, and in Mozart studies already in the year 2006, there were long lists of which you find on each composer in each. Of course, you would expect to find a great deal of information about opera. And finally now we're finding that Spanish students, where RIPM is a bit available, are beginning to use it as a tool for work on their dissertations. Now, what does RIPM provide? It provides primary source material. All scholars are interested in primary source material. And what RIPM allows you to do is see the organic development of music, and it also allows you to take a slice, a vertical slice of music, and look at musical history at a given period in many, many different countries. It allows you to trace the movement and relative influence of composers and many, many things. This is to begin to understand what an index gives you. This is perhaps the most important thing today I'm going to say about indexing. There are primarily two ways to gain access to material. One is an index that's annotated, such as RILM or RIPM, RILM with abstracts, RIPM with annotations, in which case you search the index to get to the full text. The other way is searching the full text itself with no index. This is an immense subject that we can't go into, but we do both things in two different projects. Now, this is an example of one annotated record. On the bottom, you see a standard bibliographical reference. On the top, everything in yellow, you see, has been added by one of our editors. So when you search the index, you're not searching simply titles, you're searching the annotated content. Now here you see, I hope you see, this is the only slide I'm going to show of the RIPM index. We pulled up revueltas, and for revueltas, you see that there are blue arrows. Each of these arrows points to the annotation. So if you look at the last one, number 28, which is Boletín Latinoamericano de Música, you'll see that the annotation is about 10 times longer than the title. So the RIPM annotated index is really about 80% annotation for access. And you just press a button, and that leads you directly to the page in the journal that you wish to view. So do not forget, we supply the index and access to the journal. We also take all of those index citations and put them together as a table of content, so that if you want to look at 1836, the Revue Gazette Musicale de Paris, on January, you pull up that issue, and you have a highly annotated table of content to that issue, which means that if you just look at the tables of content of any magazine as we produce them in RIPM, you will have an overview of musical life of the period of that time. Now, this is the other kind of access, full text access, where there is no index, and we simply tell you, on this page, you'll find this. Now, why do we do it this way? Because we have 800,000 annotated records in RIPM, in the index. Musical America, if we were to index it, that's a very important 20th century journal in the United States. If we were to index that, we would have for that alone 2,400,000 records. So some things are beyond our human abilities, so we serve it up this way. We still give you access, we tell you where the material is, and then we take you directly to the page. So if you could see this, we searched for Chavez and went immediately to the location on the page where Chavez is cited. And then we talked a bit about RIPM as being a source for music before 1800, and you can see that there are an immense number of citations, annotated records in Rillum, but the moment you unleash the power of full-text searches, you have advantages and disadvantages. And in the case of Bach, you have over 42,000 places to look. Of course, you limit your searches by delimiter Bach and cello, or Bach and cello suites. Now, here you have an example of Rippum and Rillum. Rippum will naturally have many more citations to composers of this period because we're indexing the period itself. Rillum is indexing what those scholars have said about it. But again, look at what the e-library brings, this full text access. It's really quite remarkable. This is another example where you see that lesser-known composers have an important place in Rippum, and of course would obviously have less of a place in Rippum, but for you that's good, because this is a sign that if Pacini, has anyone heard of Pacini? Some, very few. Pacini, an important composer, contemporary of Bellini and Donizetti. We have 1,600 references for him, and he's barely mentioned in a textbook. If you look at, if you compare it with Grove, our references, or MGG, the number goes from one figure to up to figures in 1,000 in Rippum. We're also working now on the 20th century, going to 1966, so more and more citations. But when I'm talking about citations, I'm also talking about articles that you can read as you move through. Now, if you're a clarinetist, you're a performer, and you're interested in literature for your instrument, you simply look up the instrument and you will be given thousands of references, many of which will reveal works that you have no idea that existed. Now, how do you know of their value? Rippum can only tell you that this work was played many different times in many locations, and it was highly successful. This work was not played very much. The fact that a work is cited in Rippum simply tells you it was performed. But when it's cited many times and treated to decent reviews in many countries, it might be an indication that you yourself might want to actually look at the music. And if you were a clarinet player, play something other than the Mozart Clarinet Concerto. Now, there are about 370,000 reviews. So for reception history, we're the place to go. We're also, I think, the largest biographical dictionary with over 20,000 references to people and biographical sketches, obituaries, and the like. Now, if you don't read a given language, it's little known, but during this period, let me find my button here. I'm lost without my button. Yeah. Many articles were translated from one language to another, so that an article that appeared in German might appear 2 months later in English in a translation. Same thing for Spanish. So the fact that you can't read the journal in the original language of the article doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a translation of the title of the article in a different journal. Now you might say, but if I can't read Russian, how can I know that this is something in a language that I can read? Well, you press a button and we translate the title of the article from Russian to Spanish to Serbo-Croat, so you can find out what's interesting. And you can find out whether this pertains to your subject. Now, there are over 14,000 references to illustrations, 64,000 references to advertisements, which are very important. And this is of a particular interest. Many, many universities and colleges are beginning to use Rippum as a source for an electronic teaching tool. Now, if you simply look at this list of subjects that you can study, in my own graduate seminars, I would ask my students, even in undergraduate studies at times, I would figure out the subject that they're interested in with them, find out the languages that they could handle, and ask them to prepare a small anthology of contemporary articles about the subject of interest, and then annotate them, and explain why they're important. So you're giving the student access to primary source material. You're forcing them to think about those articles, to make judgments about those that are most important. You're teaching them to synthesize and explain why they're important, and also to learn the tools that allow you to annotate. These are just some of the materials, some of the subjects that you find in the press. And of course, we have, as I said, about 250 complete journals and full runs. And this I want to point out because this occupies us a great deal. Can you read this? Ripon digitizes and reconstructs all of this material ourselves. So these are the kind of things that we find. Can you see in the upper left-hand corner, there's a page that's half been eaten? Well, a bunch of rodents got into a library and began eating the pages of the journals. So we then have to go find another copy of the journal to create a complete run. There are missing volumes, missing pages. Libraries tell us that we can find a complete run of a journal in their library, and we go to the library and we find one issue of the journal. Now, can you see the little thing over here that says sections cut out? It's sections cut out. That was a very fashionable thing to do in the library world. You would take all of your journals and you would cut them up into pieces, and you would put the pieces in a file. So this might have, that little piece that was extracted might have gone into your Mozart file. Well, we have to now go back and find the files and reconstruct. Or many times we have to consult 6 or 7 libraries. And in addition to this, there was flooding and war and just about everything that you can imagine that led to the destruction of this material that we have to spend a very significant amount of time reconstructing. And we work with about 60 libraries around the world to reconstruct this material. These are just some in the United States and a couple in Europe. Ripon digitizes everything. We do this ourselves. Number one, because we do a better job than would be done commercially. And number two, we can't afford it to do commercially. We have 2 scanning stations, one at the Ripon Center, and this is now a larger space than you see. And we have one at the Library of Congress. And we've been given a very, very special honor to be able to maintain at the Library of Congress a scanning station and freedom to scan the materials that go into Ripon. Now, the scanning station at the Library of Congress can travel, so we intend to take that scanning station to other libraries around the world. And we'll get into, this afternoon, what we give back to the libraries when we scan, because the giving goes 2 ways. You get images of the highest quality, and by using grayscale without going into anything technical, you can see that with the grayscale and high quality imaging, you can read through the watermark, but if you scan bitonally, you get a big black blob. We work with RILM, and collectively we offer access to 250 years of music periodical literature. I've shown you what we've published in Latin America. This gives you a quick overview of what, and it's my next to the last slide, of what Ripon offers. A unique context, complete runs, 200 years of literature, easy access. When a conservatory subscribes, you have access to it in your home. So you can do this research from the comfort of your desktop, or in bed if you like. Access to new repertory for performers, a teaching tool, access to the literature of the founding fathers of musicology, which has not been available until the work that, large part, hasn't been available until the work that we're doing. And I think you can read the rest. So, in point of fact, we at Ripon, and this is just a silly illustration. If you look at the history of music as a forest, this is a painting by Rousseau. What comes out of that forest in our history books are major characters. Here, represented by 4 animals looking out of the forest. But to do something very silly, when you begin to look at Ripon carefully, the history of music changes, and it begins to look more like this, that there are many more apples and fruits on the trees, and we simply must take time to explore them. Thank you for your interest, and now I'm going to pass this to my colleague, whom I ask simply to type in the word Mexico as any student would, and tell us what's in two very specific parts of Ripon, the early period and 10 years of musical America. I asked him to exclude what's in Mexican periodicals, because my assumption is that you have access to them. So I'm passing it over now to my friend and colleague, Gabrielle. And if you have any questions, there's my email address. You can write me.